Welcome back. World leaders met on Friday to discuss the lingering political crisis in Syria that has killed thousands of people and displaced thousands more. The United States Secretary of State, John Kerry, headed that meeting in Vienna. But it seems Russia, which has begun airstrikes on its targets a few weeks ago, has taken on a new role of peacemaker.
The talks were not to set any deadline, but they held a lot of expectations that leaders would be able to make some progress forward on a permanent solution to the civil war in Syria. 17 countries, the European Union and the United Nations were present at the talks in Vienna. Hours in, and the participants, including the United States and Russia, said progress had been made, but that differences still remained, although they all agreed it was important to accelerate all diplomatic efforts to end the war. But the talks were constructive, according to the EU Foreign Affairs Minister, Federica Mogherini.
We tackled major issues that were on the table. You will see the common statements, but we found common ground to continue talks. I'll come back to that. I would say that this meeting was definitely not an easy one, but for sure an historical one, as we had for the first time all the actors around the table, and I would say a very constructive atmosphere. And I would like to express publicly my thanks in the name of all the Europeans that have invested a lot in this process, to all those that took difficult decisions to come and sit together at this table. And I believe that we have some common ground on which we can build in the future. So there is hope for a political process to start under the UN auspices and with all of us coming together again.
The talks ended without a specific conclusion apart from an agreement to reconvene in some form this week. Among key points yet unresolved was the question of which rebel groups should be considered terrorists and who should be involved in the political process. But U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the main agreement had been on the destruction of the Islamic State.
We agreed that Daesh and other terrorist groups, as designated by the UN Security Council and as agreed by the participants, must be defeated. We invited the UN to convene representatives of the government of Syria and the Syrian opposition for a political process leading to a credible, inclusive, non-sectarian governance, followed by a new constitution and elections. We agreed that these elections must be administered under UN supervision to the satisfaction of the governed and to the highest international standards of transparency and accountability, free and fair, with all Syrians, including the diaspora, eligible to participate.
Iran, which was invited to the meeting for the first time, being a strong ally of the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, signaled it would back a 6-month political transition period in Syria, followed by elections to decide President Assad's fate. That proposal was rejected by the others, skeptical it was a plan to help President Assad remain in power. Right before the talks, France had reiterated its position on the Syrian president, saying that any solution to the conflict would have to be without President Bashar al-Assad. As the talks ended, the U.S. President Barack Obama said he intends to deploy dozens of special forces to northern Syria to advise opposition forces in their fight against the Islamic State. A senior member of the Obama administration said the number of special operations troops in Syria would be fewer than 50 and would likely be between 20 and 30. Russia, another strong ally of President Assad, said the decision to deploy special forces would make cooperation between the U.S. and Russian armed forces even more important.
President Muhammadu Buhari has been back in the country, having attended the India-Africa Summit in New Delhi. While economic cooperation was firmly on the table, leaders also discussed issues such as climate change and terrorism, which Nigeria and India have been very concerned about.
The India-Africa Summit was organized to improve economic ties between India and the African continent. The 4-day summit is the biggest gathering of foreign dignitaries in New Delhi since the 1983 Non-Alignment Summit.
The vast territory
There have been 2 previous summits like this one, in 2008 in New Delhi and in 2011 in Addis Ababa. But attendance was from a select number of African countries. The partnership is strategic. India is Africa's 4th largest trading partner after China, the United States and the European Union. In the past few years, trade between India and Africa has grown from $25 billion in 2006 to over $70 billion today. While India has investments in Nigeria, ranging from health to vehicle manufacturing, it remains the largest importer of crude oil from Nigeria. As with other developed countries, the invitation has always been to come to Africa to do business. But at the summit last week, the tables were turned and the invitation was for Africa to come and do business in India. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced the grant of a $10 billion loan from his country to Africa within a 5-year span and promised India would grant assistance of $600 million to Africa in the same period, including scholarships for 50,000 African students in India in the next 5 years.
From connecting lives to collaborating for our prosperity, from keeping our people safe to advantage our global interests. The agenda of our partnership stretches across the vast territory of our linked aspirations. To add strength to our partnership, India will offer concessional credit of $10 billion over the next 5 years.
But there were other areas of keen interest for the countries gathered. Security and the issue of terrorism was one, something India and some countries on the continent such as Nigeria, Kenya, Tunisia, Somalia and Egypt could relate to. It was also something President Muhammadu Buhari also played up in his address to the summit on Thursday. The Boko Haram insurgency has worked to undermine the government's efforts at development and productivity. In light of the thousands of lives lost and billions displaced, President Buhari gave the military a deadline of December to end the insurgency. Later at the summit, he said, deadline or not, the important thing was to get rid of the insurgents.
From west to the east, north to south, virtually every country in our respective regions is faced with unacceptable levels of poverty, unemployment, and youth bulge. India and Africa must develop a new spirit of solidarity, cooperation, and partnership to confront these emerging threats. We must recognize that in this globalized age, we all live interconnected lives in a fragile planet. We must therefore work together to uplift the lives of our people in a manner that preserves the sustainability of our living environment.
Climate change was also a topical issue. Prime Minister Modi urged the leaders to join an alliance of solar-rich countries at next month's Paris Climate Conference, where the international community will gather to try to hammer out a successor to the Kyoto Climate Protocol. The Prime Minister spoke about reforms of the UN Security Council, which he said need to better reflect today's geopolitical realities. He solicited support for India's place in the Council as a permanent member. And though the call was for Africans to do business in India, African leaders encouraged India to do more business in Africa.
The war on terror can be won using varying strategies. Ambassador Joe Keshi discusses them after the break. Please join us again.